Hello everyone, and welcome back to the FIDE Candidates 2026, the prestigious tournament where the world's elite grandmasters battle for the right to challenge the world champion. We are now through 3 rounds, and the picture is already starting to take shape in a very dramatic way. Round 3 gave us 4 games in total, with 2 of them ending decisively and 2 ending in draws. That means the tension remains high. And every point is absolutely precious at this stage of the competition. At the top of the standings, we have a fascinating co-leadership situation. Fabiano, Caruana, and Javokir Sindarov are both sitting on 2.5 points out of 3, and they are clearly the form players of this tournament so far. Behind them, a cluster of players on 1.5 points, Pragnananda and Matthias Bluebaum, are still very much in contention. Then we have Hikaru Nakamura, Anish Giri, Wei Yi, and Andrei Asipenko all on a single point, meaning they are already under significant pressure in a double round-robin format like the candidates. Falling 2 full points behind the leader after just 3 rounds puts enormous strain on your calculations for the rest of the event. The story of this round belongs primarily to Fabiano Caruana, who continues his remarkable run with a clinical win with the white pieces. Caruana looks absolutely in command, playing with the kind of confidence and precision we associate with him at his very best. His opponent, Wei Yi, is a deeply talented and creative player who has had a difficult start to this tournament, and a loss here means he now faces an uphill battle to claw his way back into contention. The decisive game today features one of the most fascinating and deceptive openings you will see at this level, the English opening evolving into an Anglo-Indian structure, where Caruana steered the game into treacherous tactical waters early on and never looked back. Let us dive right in. Fabiano Caruana, rated 2795, is one of the most technically precise players in the world and a former world championship challenger. Wei Yi of China, rated 2754, is known for his sharp, tactical, and creative play. Caruana leads the tournament co-jointly with 2.5 points, while Wei Yi desperately needs a win after a slow start. The Anglo-Indian defense arising from the English opening is a highly flexible system seen regularly at the top level. Players like Kramnik, Carlsen, and Caruana himself have employed these structures. It allows white to delay central commitments while building long-term pressure, often leading to rich positional battles with both sides maneuvering carefully before the real fight begins. Caruana opens with knight to f3, a flexible and sophisticated choice that avoids committing to an immediate central pawn structure. This move has been a favorite of players like Kramnik and Carlsen, keeping all options open. The game could transpose into a queen's gambit, a reti, or an English depending on how both sides develop. Wei Yi mirrors with knight to f6, the most natural and principled response, fighting for central control and keeping his own options wide open. This symmetry in the opening signals that black intends to play actively and not simply sit back. Now Caruana plays c4, staking a claim in the center and steering the game firmly into English opening territory. The c4 pawn controls the d5 square and signals white's intention to build a broad space advantage on the queen side and center. Wei Yi responds with c5, immediately challenging white's queenside space and establishing his own presence in the center. This symmetrical pawn thrust is one of black's most combative replies, aiming for active piece play rather than passive defense. Caruana fianchettos his king's bishop with g3, a hallmark of the classical English setup. The idea is to develop the bishop to g2, where it will exert long-term diagonal pressure toward the center and black's queenside. Wei Yi adopts the same idea, preparing to fianchetto his own bishop on g7. This mirrors Caruana's setup and leads to a double fianchetto structure where both bishops on g2 and g7 will battle for supremacy along the long diagonal. The knight comes to c3, reinforcing white's influence over the central squares d5 and e4. Development is progressing smoothly, and Caruana is building a solid and harmonious setup before deciding where to focus his attention. Wei Yi strikes immediately, in the center with d5, a very direct and principled pawn thrust. This challenges white's spatial claims right away and aims to open the game before Caruana can fully consolidate his piece placement. Caruana captures with the c-pawn, exchanging in the center and clarifying the pawn structure. This trade opens the d-file and forces Wei Yi to make a decision about how to recapture. Black recaptures with the knight, placing it on the powerful central d5 outpost. A knight on d5 in these structures is extremely well placed, and Wei Yi is perfectly happy to have this piece dominating the center. The bishop arrives on g2, completing the fianchetto and creating a powerful long-range weapon pointing at black's queenside. Now with the bishop on g2 and the knight on c3, white has considerable pressure bearing down on the d5 knight, and Wei Yi completes his own fianchetto, developing the bishop to g7. Now both sides have their king's bishops powerfully posted, and the battle of the long diagonals is set to begin. The position looks roughly equal. But the game is about to take a very sharp turn. Here is where Caruana reveals his aggressive intentions, queen to a4, a surprising check that immediately creates complications. This move forces black to deal with the threat right away and begins a sequence of forcing moves that will dramatically alter the character of the position. Wei Yi blocks the check with knight to c6, the most natural reply, developing a piece while shielding the king. However, notice that now black has two knights on c6 and d5, which creates an interesting target for white. Caruana swings the knight to g5 with tremendous energy, immediately threatening to exploit the pin and create weaknesses in black's camp. The knight on g5 eyes the e6 and f7 squares and coordinates menacingly with the queen on a4. Wei Yi retreats the knight to b6, stepping away from the queen's attack and relieving immediate pressure on d5. However, this creates a new vulnerability. The c6 knight is now left without the support of its companion on d5. And Caruana strikes immediately with bishop takes c6 check, demolishing black's knight on c6 and doubling Wei Yi's pawns. This trade is very significant. White picks up black's well-placed knight and hands black a structural weakness in the form of doubled c-pawns. Wei Yi recaptures with the b-pawn, forced, and now the c-pawns are doubled on c5 and c6. The c6 pawn is particularly weak and will be a long-term target for white throughout the game. Caruana is not done. Queen takes c6, winning a pawn immediately with check and maintaining the initiative. The queen has entered black's position like a wrecking ball, and Wei Yi is being forced to react at every turn. Wei Yi blocks with bishop to d7, the only sensible move to protect against the check and contest the queen. The bishop on d7 guards the c6 square, but now Caruana's queen is beautifully active in the heart of black's position. White takes another pawn with queen to c5, calmly harvesting material while maintaining pressure. Caruana has won 2 pawns in the opening phase, and while his king is still uncastled, the engine confirms the position is still roughly balanced. Wei Yi has compensation in activity and piece coordination. Wei Yi pushes h6, kicking the knight on g5 away and gaining a tempo while creating a little luft for his king. This is a practical decision: dislodge the annoying knight and then seek to generate counterplay. The knight retreats to f3, a calm repositioning move. Caruana does not panic. He simply steps back to a solid square and maintains his material advantage while keeping the position under control. Black activates the rook to c8, pointing it directly at white's queen and beginning to generate counterplay. Wei Yi understands that with 2 pawns down, he must create active threats to have any chance of salvaging the position. The queen sidesteps to a5, keeping the pressure on while staying out of harm's way from the rook. Caruana is playing very accurately, threading between black's threats while maintaining the extra material. Wei Yi plays bishop to h3, an aggressive lunge targeting white's rook on h1 and attempting to create tangible counterplay. This bishop is now very actively placed and causes white some real inconvenience. Caruana fires back with queen to b5 check, keeping the initiative and forcing Wei Yi to deal with another threat rather than being allowed to simply increase the pressure on h1. These queen checks are a recurring theme in Caruana's handling of this position. Wei Yi blocks with knight to d7, defending against the check and reactivating the knight toward the center. The position is still dynamically tense. Black has 2 active pieces in the bishop on h3 and the knight on d7, offering some practical compensation. Caruana plays rook to g1, a clever prophylactic move that defends the g1 square against any backrank ideas and prepares to push the g-pawn forward. Notice that the king on e1 still has not castled, which is entirely intentional. Caruana keeps his king flexible. Wei Yi castles kingside, bringing his king to safety. With the bishop still sitting on h3, attacking the rook on h1, black has some activity going. And the position remains complicated enough that Wei Yi can still fight for a draw. And now Caruana plays g4, a thematic and powerful pawn advance that attacks the bishop on h3 directly while seizing space on the kingside. With this move, white essentially says, your active bishop is going to cost you tempo, and I am going to use that time to consolidate my advantage. Wei Yi plays rook to c5, aiming to attack Caruana's queen and generate counterplay. However, this turns out to be the critical mistake of the game. The rook move looks active on the surface, but it fundamentally misreads the requirements of the position. Stockfish evaluates this as a mistake, with the evaluation swinging from roughly equal to plus 1.1 in white's favor. The rook has moved away from the c8 square, giving up potential backrank activity. At a moment when black needed to address the bishop on h3 first, perhaps with something like bxg4 to exchange the bishop for a pawn and ease the tension. Caruana immediately exploits the rook's misplacement with queen to b3, a superb defensive and offensive move in one. The queen now attacks the rook on c5 while simultaneously defending against the bishop on h3, and Stockfish gives white a significant plus 1.5 advantage here. This is the second and even more serious mistake, knight to e5. Wei Yi launches his knight to the center, threatening to jump further, but this move allows Caruana a devastating tactical sequence. The evaluation absolutely collapses for black here, swinging by 4 full pawns to give white a plus 2.6 advantage. The knight on e5 is unprotected and creates a serious tactical vulnerability that Caruana exploits immediately. Caruana takes the knight without hesitation. Knight takes e5. This capture wins material and sets up a crushing sequence, and Stockfish confirms white is now nearly 3 pawns ahead in evaluation. Wei Yi recaptures with rook takes e5, the only move to avoid immediate material loss, but this turns out to be yet another mistake, the third key error in just a few moves. The evaluation swings by an astonishing 5.7 pawns, and what was already a difficult position for black becomes completely lost. The rook on e5 is now exposed and vulnerable to the knight on d1 maneuver that Caruana has prepared. And Caruana plays the beautiful and cold-blooded knight to d1, a quiet retreat that threatens to bring the knight via f2 to attack the rook on e5 while also defending the queen on b3. Stockfish gives white plus 2.9 here, and the position is essentially resignable for Wei Yi. The rook on e5 is hanging, the bishop on h3 is out of play, and black's position has completely collapsed. The game was ultimately decided by Wei Yi's 3 consecutive mistakes, beginning with rook to c5, then knight to e5, and finally rook takes e5, which together turned a balanced position into a catastrophic loss. Caruana's patient queen maneuvering and the thematic g4 advance created the conditions that made those errors fatal, and his clinical technique never gave Wei Yi a route back into the game. And that wraps up round 3 of the FIDE Candidates 2026. Caruana continues his dominant run, co-leading alongside the impressive Sindarov on 2.5 points. The race to become the World Championship challenger is heating up. Who do you think will take sole possession of first place in round 4? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single move.